slide, please.
I brought my own water. It's otherwise known as coffee. It's a magic potion. I've drank coffee before I really get into the seriousness of today. I've been drinking coffee since the day I arrived at home from the hospital. My mother's Native American, and her family, there was some notion that a newborn child should always be given coffee when they come home. And I don't care if that's good or bad, because I'm 71 and it's treated me right ever since. So I was given a baby bottle with creamer and I guess some sugar, and her dad gave me the bottle, and I've been on it since. Thank you for having me, Paula. You're a treasure and a treat. Good to know you from West Cap Ward. I have been a pastor / minister for over 50 years. I have run into an opportunity, otherwise known as a new life project for me, and that is what we saw earlier about spiritual refugees. Since the turn of this century, 40 to 45 million people in the United States have exited. They've found the exits from organized religion, in whatever form that may be. It's largely located in a lot of evangelical groups and some other Catholic groups. Whatever they may be, though, there's been a mass exodus. I remember reading about some of this coming on in the 90s, and in my arrogance and foolishness at that time, I thought, pshaw, never come my way. It didn't just come my way, it fell out of the sky like a meteor at the turn of the century. And then it just only increased with time. I like to call it, I was blindsided by a snail. And I watched in horror in some ways, but then I started feeling this relief, which was bizarre. And the relief was, wait a minute, maybe this is the loud knock on the door I've been waiting for, and maybe others, that something is amiss. I like to say, advice we listen to, pain we obey. I think you all know what that means. If life is the school of hard knocks, rock bottom is a PhD. And I'm really pleased to say that I have a PhD in the sky, but not on any paper. My PhD has come as a result, and the repair that I've needed over the past half a dozen years has been significant. Because I invested my whole life, my education, my training, my processes, the conferences, the places I went, and the groups that I associated with. I found myself deeply entrenched in what, again, I know to be I call it, for the sake of clarity, Church Incorporated. However you may define that, however the groups may be institutionalized. Am I connecting with you? Do you hear what I'm saying? So to that end, this quote from Barbara Brown Taylor has been on my radar solidly for the better part of these last half a dozen years. Barbara Brown Taylor, if you've never heard of her, she's written some marvelous books. She's an Episcopal priest in Georgia. She exited organized Episcopalian ministry, I believe, I'm just guessing, about a decade ago. Because she, unlike me, saw this snail blindsiding us and realized that some things got to change. And if I can't change others, which is brilliant, then I must change me. Then I've got to move me towards something that looks like this. This is sort of, for me, it's a capstone of who she is. And that is, the hardest spiritual work in the world is to love the neighbor as the self. To encounter another human being, not as someone to fix, change, use, help, save, enroll, convince, or control. I'm just exhausted saying this. But simply as someone. Now focus on that word, as someone, meaning the neighbor, or the enemy, or somebody in between, as someone who can spring you from the prison of yourself if you will allow it. And that's that for me is a mantra. That someone, whoever someone is, can spring me from my own prison, if I'll allow it. So my title for today in repair is the hardest spiritual work in the world is love. I like to say it's important for us to rescue love from silly sentiment. Love, I think, has been easy to say. I grew up in the hippie generation. I was a wannabe hippie. I tried my hardest to be a hippie. I just couldn't quite get the swing of it because Dad said, as long as your feet are under my table, you're going to dress the way I want. So that's a snapshot of my father. But love was the buzzword. It was the cry. It was if you can't be with the one you love. Hey, you were there. You heard about it. So that was my teenage years, and I always grew up with it. And I have other stories, but just to suffice to say, with great regret, I watched love become just that, a buzzword, but not a practical, useful spiritual practice. And I'm going to spend the rest of my days seeking, in any way I can, to repair for myself and also reach for getting this magnificent diamond called love toward a practical, purposeful spiritual practice. Because as Barbara Brown Taylor says, that if I can move away from codependency, does anybody understand what that is? Codependency is on that list. Codependency is, hi Paula, I'm here to fix you. Brilliant lady right there. Codependency says that somebody told me this one time, you know you're codependent when you're about to die and somebody else's life flashes before your eyes. What will they ever do without me? Unfortunately, though, if I'm living that, then I'm badly damaged. Something in me has been magnetized to all the wrong things. And I'm calling it love. But that's not love. It's codependency, which is a sickness. Hi, I'm Randy. I'm a codependent in recovery. It's a magnificent thing for some churches to hire a codependent pastor. They will eat you up and spit you out at your own feet. Use you and say, you didn't do enough. And then you will say, oh, I didn't do enough. But that's not love. That's a sickness. But I'm convinced that love is, as Barbara Brown Taylor, love for the other. That's someone, when I love the other, I'm springing me from a prison of my own making. Again, fix, manage, control, recruit, enlist, convert, enroll, convince, entice, examine, advise, and save. So, to that end, I'm spiritual care director for a recovery group, and one of my friends here is a part of that as well. Spiritual program retreat holds 4, sometimes 5, when we're trying too hard, to weekends of retreat where we do an immersion basically in the 12 steps, where we invite people to come for 3 days and just take a deep dive in the 12 steps of AA or Al-Anon or Coda. So it's beautiful. And for us, I say I'm the unicorn among them. Most of our spiritual program retreat alumni are addicts, alcoholics, and have other addictions that are just in need of the 12 steps in that regard. But for me, we like to call Randy the normie in the bunch. I'm the vice president of this nonprofit where we are reaching out primarily to addicts and alcoholics, but I brought my unicorn self to their bunch. And I've said, look, we're just as in need of repair as any alcoholic. Jokingly, I say, I don't get off on Jack Daniels. I get off on jacked up people. And I really mean that. Because I grew up in a home with significant addiction and alcohol issues. So, to repair somebody else became the addiction. All of the good feelings went off when I was fixing you. But unfortunately, Randy was living in a prison of his own addiction, and it was killing me. And I do mean killing. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. So, I went off on a journey to discover what it would look like to find myself. And when I found myself in a lot of religious behavior that called codependency spiritual behavior. As long as we're fixing everybody else, we're spiritual. And the problem with that is gargantuan. It's simply brokenness labeled as wholeness. And we must look at that brokenness. Am I connecting dots for you? Or you? And this would be a yes, and this is a no. I can take a no. Okay. But I want to make sure I'm not racing through this in any way. So, my goal is to rescue love and to take people in spiritual refugee status who've been running for the exits and help them find a way to find love away from the silly sentiments and raise love to the level of what we read here to a useful spiritual pursuit, a useful, practical spiritual pursuit. So I'm going to give you 3 things. Yes, I'm that guy. I'll give you 3 things to think about. And had Paula not said, I'm done doing slides, which she meant very well, nicely, beautifully. And then it was right after that I thought, oh, I have 3 slides. But I'll give them to you in organic form. First of all, if we're going to raise and rescue love from the silly sentiment, first of all, we've got to see love as the ultimate selfish unselfishness. To love is the ultimate selfish unselfishness. It causes me, once again, according to this quote, to see the other in a way that is this invitation for me to discover what love looks like for someone that may be completely over there politically. My first vote. So okay if I tell you who I voted for the first time I voted back in the 70s? Richard Nixon. Oh, come on. But I have a friend. I have one friend. Here was a teenager, rock solid in everything I'm thinking, and here's my father, who was born and raised in East Texas, and his candidate was George Wallace. And if you know anything about George Wallace, you know who my dad was. But here was my mother, a codependent queen, because of all the stuff in her life. Mom had a hidden candidate. I didn't. I was Richard Nixon. My dad was George Wallace, boy. And Mom was a talking. That's what codependents do a lot. We were sitting at the dinner table, and Dad said, "Who are we voting for?" And my mother, in her kind, codependent way, said, "Now, Dean, that's not nice to ask like that." And right away he said, "Oh, great. You didn't vote for George Wallace." Well, being the teenager I was, I said, "Well, I voted for Richard Nixon." Well, and then my mother finally begrudgingly admitted she voted for Humphrey. Here we were, all 3 of us in our little home, not a house divided, but triple torn. But I look at that now, and I bring that up because it became a reference point and a real powerful illustration for me of how my repair was recognizing my father was in another political spectrum. But I must tell you, I love him deeply. He's no longer here. He died when he was 68. And his last real parental movement in my life was to say to me, "Randy, I realize I've spent my whole life and never told you I love you." I was 18. It was shocking. I was mad. I was confused. But I realized that's my dad. And I know now what a profound thing that did for me. And it moved me toward this whole notion of love in its practical spiritual practice can release you from a prison. I love my dad. I wish I had one more day so we can talk politics. And talk about it with a civil, loving connection. My mother, like I said, she was the codependent. Of course she was going to vote for Humphrey, as opposed to Nixon or Wallace, right? See, her whole life was reflected in that vote. But I gotta say, I love my mom, and she's no longer here. And I recognize that microcosm, that little slice of Americana, and that little table was an invitation someday, some way, one of the three of us to do something practical down here with rescuing love from silly sentiment. So that's number one song. It's really the ultimate selfish unselfishness. It's called me out of my prison. Number two, it's a transcendent target above the abyss of entanglement and rage. I've come to the conclusion of late, I'm not sure if any others of you, there it is, can say that this entanglement of rage is not serving us well. It doesn't serve our souls well. But the practical practice of love is an invitation to get out of that entanglement of constant rage. We weren't built to be in constant rage. It causes so many significant problems in our bodies, our souls, our spirit, our psyche is ripped in shreds by constant rage. But if I make love my spiritual practice, and I want to say this again, I'm not suggesting this is easy. In fact, I'm telling you straightforwardly, this is hard work. The hard work of love is it's a mountain climb. What I know about mountain climbing, which is very little, but those who climb mountains into the thin air have to go up, and then they have to come back down to base camp. Stay a little while there to avoid altitude sickness. So they go up and down, and up and down, and up and down until they reach the summit. I've discovered that's how love works. I've got to go up and down and up and down to avoid love sickness. I've got to come back to myself and get into some zone with a mentor, a friend, some reading, Brown Taylor, and a dozen other people who have a brilliant assessment of how love works and how love doesn't work. And in my recovery as a codependent, to know that this codependency it's the enemy of my quality of life. Though I may feel like I'm helping everybody, I'm throwing me away. And if I throw me away, then I'm of no value for anybody, and especially myself. This constant entanglement of rage seems to be the hobby du jour, doesn't it? And I've come to the conclusion that love in its most profound and practical practice is inviting me to get out of that cycle. And to look at a table where a mom and a dad and a teenage boy are sitting there, peering at each other. And to discover what's motivating all of this. What's cooking in those souls around me. Not that I can fix, manage, or control, but that I'm reacting to, that I'm bouncing off of. Because at that time when I was a teenager, I was bouncing off my father's big, bad, type A truck driver self. Teamster, deluxe, drive, cross picket lines, get shot at and come home and brag about it. It's exhausting, the perpetual rage. Now I see my father in a whole other light, that his life was steeped in that. It's not that I agree with how that life was lived, it's that I feel empathy and a sense of sadness. And now looking back at a man laying in a hospital bed just prior to his death, saying, Randy, I realize I've never said I love you. So while I received that benefit, but I also look at my dad and say, oh my gosh, Dad, I love you. And I think everybody in the room perhaps has discovered fixing your father never works. Oh, here's a worse one. Fix your mother. Sorry, that sounded bad, I guess. But I tried to fix my mother later, and it was harder to do. Because as a codependent, my mother was convinced all was well. Look at how much I'm doing for you. And I couldn't stop her. Why? Because I couldn't stop me. Third slide for me is, now this one's going to take perhaps a little bit of a dive into something. I want you to just work with me on it. The practical purpose and the hard labor of love is my safe space when existential dread is knocking on my door. Okay, here's what existential dread is. I believe everybody in this room has had an episode. It usually comes about in the dark of night. And you're in bed, and you roll over. Your brain says, oh no, here we go. Your brain will go to that worst moment, the worst problem, the bill to pay, the neighbor that, I don't know, maybe a national election. Your brain will go there, and you're saying to yourself, no, don't go there. Existential dread is this empty sense that what can go wrong is going to go wrong. I can't define it, I can't explain it, though at 3 in the morning I will try. And I will fight with me about this dreadful feeling. By the way, existential dread is not just a fancy title I came up with. It's from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the United States government. It is a definable, nationwide, I'm sure worldwide, mental health issue. It's this cloud that comes upon with no warning and nothing to do with it, except reach for something. I'm going to offer you something to reach for. The practical, hard labor of love. Ask the question in the moment of existential dread, whether it's 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. Who do I love? What do I love? Who do I love? What do I love? Beware of asking, who loves me? Because existential dread will sniff at you and say, nobody loves you. Look at you, you 3 in the morning mess. Who would love this? That's existential dread talking. But if I can ask, who do I love? And a lot of times in the middle of the night, and these friends of mine will tell you, I listen to my little short-nosed Cavalier King Charles Spaniel snoring. And I think, I love that dog. A sweet little snore. That's important. That's a safe place in the middle of existential dread. But it's love that pulls me out of that funk toward a healthy something. Who do I love? What do I love? I ought to tell you, I love this. I told somebody the other day, they said, well, why do you still speak? And I said, oh, it's like the recreational side of being a pastor. You don't have to put up with boards and decisions and conflicts and codependent people and your own codependency. I can just speak and run away. It's fun for me. It really is. It's a fun practice for me. It's a practice of love. I love doing this. And I love the notion that I'm here in the universe for this. I can just stand here and tell my story and offer some slivers of practical advice. Not fix, manage, control, use, convert, save, enroll, And by the way, when I say this about religious personas, religious atmospheres, and please hear me when I say there are a variety of groups that are coming. Anybody home? I have some information for you. That cold call. I've done it. I was in my bachelor's program. I was put in. Wow. I was thrown into a college town along with 3 or 4 other naive children to go into a fraternity circle, knocking on doors to quote unquote witness. Well, the 3 of us were terrified. But we were taught to put on a brave face. Be confident. Look them right in the eye. Hand them your brochures. Tell them, I'm here to save you. That's not just hard work. That's slavery. And it's unfortunate that spirituality gets put in that category. I remember somewhere there was an old motto, transportation circles. Buckle up. The life you save may be your own. I'm not here to save you. I'm saving me. Wherever you are, whatever your challenges, whatever your existential dread is, I want you to find a safe place and ask yourself, who and what do I love? The video earlier about setting and stitching was gorgeous. This person found stitching as a piece of repair because there was love in there. Loving every stitch, loving every mistake you make. And I think that's beautiful. My daughter, it's knitting, not crocheting. It's one of those. She has these needles that are, and we know when life is tough, she could knit a sweater for an elephant when things are tough. Because she knows I've got to put this energy somewhere other than beating me up or beating you up. And I've got to find some serenity. Okay, I'm going to bring this in for a landing. I don't believe for one split second that we're in the midst of the most important election of our generation. I don't believe that. I believe we're in the midst of the most important moment for folks everywhere to discover the pilgrimage and the marathon of love. That's what I believe. And the challenge is enormous. I understand that. My existential dread reminds me every so often. But I have a firm grasp on a passion of heart that says, I want my life to be lived in such a way that they can say, of me, he loved. He didn't fix me. He didn't save me. He didn't recruit me. He wasn't trying to buy me into the latest program or the George Wallace camp or the Hubert Humphrey camp or the Richard Nixon camp. Say, can I tell you one story about me and Richard Nixon? In my foolhardy days of an intern in Midland, Texas, I was interning at a church in Midland, Texas. Just within weeks of his resignation, I stood in a pulpit and defended him. Oh yeah, that was me. And in that moment, it wasn't Richard Nixon who was the problem. Right here. I was the problem. And it took me a lot of time and reflection to realize, oh my goodness, there's something burning in this kitchen. I'm determined to offer people a solution for all of the above, whether it's the existential dread or the transcendent rising above all other things. are that selfish unselfishness. I'm determined to teach people, try love. And I mean, don't just say something. Find something in yourself that practices love, to spring yourself from this prison. And you're going to discover spirituality. I really, truly believe that. That is more satisfying and settling than you'll ever imagine. Here's something I tell people. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do it because it makes some folk a little nervous. It makes me nervous. And that is, learn how to say with intention and a slow pace. Learn how to say. I'll give it to my friend here, my fellow board member. We get along on a board of directors. It's just amazing. It's a miracle. Paula, I love you.
Randy, I love you.
Did you feel that in the air? It's good. I practice that with our little dog. She has trouble with the eye contact thing. My wife and I, we know each other well enough to know 50 years in August, last August, how long we've been married. We got married on the day Richard Nixon left office. What timing, huh? What timing? August 9th, 1974. He got on a helicopter and flew away. But after 50 years, we still, in our practice, and this is daily, we stop, slow it down, look each other in the eye, and say, I love you. It can be awkward. It's especially awkward when I'm letting existential dread hold me in its sway. It can be especially awkward if I'm caught in a cycle of rage. But it's especially centering when I stop and ask, who do I love? I know I love Ginger. I need to practice me slowing down. So that brings me to a last moment of saying to you, what would it look like if all of us left here with that exercise in place? What would it do for you? I'm not telling you you have to, I'm just asking you to imagine. What would it do for you going forward in life? I suspect it'll be hard. I suspect in our intimacy challenges, when we all have them, I suspect it'll be awkward. I suspect that we'll rise and fall, rise and fall. But I also suspect that the practice of practical reaching past my walls, of reaching into love, might just be the repair we all need. Right? Okay, thanks for your time.